a wild foal, trapped in a raging river. Forest Ranger David Martinez had seconds to decide: risk his life to save it, or let nature take its course. He chose to dive in. But when he finally pulled the exhausted foal from the water, what he discovered hidden beneath its soaked coat left him absolutely stunned. This isn't just a rescue story. It's a mystery that rewrote everything we thought we knew about wild horses in North America. If stories of incredible animal rescues and shocking wildlife discoveries fascinate you, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. What happens next will blow your mind. David Martinez had been a forest ranger in Colorado's San Juan National Forest for 8 years. His territory covered over 200 square miles of rugged mountain terrain, including some of the most beautiful and dangerous wilderness in the Rocky Mountains. He dealt with his share of emergencies: lost hikers, injured climbers, wildlife encounters. But nothing had quite prepared him for what he would face on that particular April morning. Spring runoff season was always treacherous in the San Juan Mountains. Months of accumulated snow melted rapidly as temperatures rose, transforming normally placid mountain streams into roaring torrents of white water. The Rio Grande and its numerous tributaries swelled to dangerous levels, their banks overflowing, their currents capable of sweeping away anything, or anyone, caught in their path. David was conducting his morning patrol along the upper Rio Grande, specifically checking for flood damage and ensuring that hiking trails near the river were safe for the upcoming tourist season. The sound of the river was deafening, a constant roar that drowned out almost everything else, which is why what happened next was so remarkable. As David navigated his ranger vehicle along a narrow Forest Service road paralleling the river, something made him stop. Later, he would struggle to explain exactly what it was. Not a sound. The river was too loud for him to have heard anything over its roar. Not a visual cue. The dense riverside vegetation blocked most of his view of the water. Perhaps it was instinct, that indefinable sixth sense that experienced wilderness professionals sometimes develop. Whatever it was, David stopped the vehicle, cut the engine, and stepped out into the cool mountain air. He stood perfectly still, listening, watching, every sense alert. And then he heard it. A sound that cut through even the river's thunder. A high-pitched, desperate scream. The unmistakable distress call of a horse. David's heart rate spiked instantly. Horses near this section of the river during spring runoff? That made no sense. The local wild Mustang populations knew to avoid the swollen waterways. Domestic horses shouldn't be anywhere near this remote area. Something was very wrong. He grabbed his emergency pack and scrambled down the steep, muddy riverbank, fighting through thick willows and riverside brush. The vegetation tore at his uniform, branches whipping his face, but he pushed forward, following the sound. The screaming continued, panicked, terrified, weakening. When David finally broke through the riverside vegetation and got his first clear view of the river, his blood ran cold. About 40 feet downstream, caught in a violent eddy where the current swirled around a large boulder, was a young horse. A foal, probably less than a year old, struggling desperately to keep its head above water. The foal was being battered by the current, repeatedly pulled under and then bobbing back to the surface, each time with less strength, less fight. Its eyes were wide with terror, its mouth open as it screamed for help that, in the wild, would never come. Hypothermia was setting in. David could see the foal's movements becoming sluggish, uncoordinated. It was drowning, and it was dying. David didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to call for backup. He didn't take time to assess the risks or follow standard safety protocols. He saw a living creature in mortal danger, and every fiber of his being screamed at him to act. He kicked off his boots, radioed his location to dispatch with a quick "water rescue in progress," and plunged into the raging Rio Grande. The shock of the ice-cold water hit David like a physical blow. The Rio Grande in April, swollen with snowmelt, was barely above freezing, cold enough to induce hypothermia in minutes, cold enough to stop a human heart if exposure was prolonged. The current was even more powerful than it looked from shore, immediately grabbing David and pulling him downstream. But David was an experienced swift water swimmer. He'd completed advanced water rescue training specifically for situations like this. He knew how to read currents, how to use the river's power rather than fighting against it, how to navigate through white water without panicking. More importantly, he knew he had perhaps 2 minutes before hypothermia would begin affecting his own coordination and decision-making. He angled his body toward the eddy where the foal struggled, using a swimming technique designed to ferry across strong currents. The key was not to fight the river's main flow, but to slice across it at an angle, using the current's own energy to propel him laterally toward his target. 40 feet had never seemed so far. David's muscles burned as he fought through the churning water, debris from upstream, broken branches, rocks, clumps of vegetation, slamming into him. One particularly large branch struck his shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The foal was going under more frequently now, staying below the surface longer each time. "Hang on, baby! Hang on!" David shouted, though he knew the terrified animal couldn't possibly understand him. But maybe the sound of a voice, any voice, would give it something to focus on, some reason to keep fighting. With a final desperate lunge, David reached the eddy. The circular current here was slightly calmer than the main river flow, but it was still powerful enough to trap both him and the foal in its grip. He grabbed for the young horse, his numb fingers finally making contact with its soaked coat. The foal panicked at his touch, thrashing wildly in a last burst of adrenaline-fueled terror. A flailing hoof caught David in the ribs, knocking the wind from his lungs. Another struck his arm, sending a bolt of pain through his elbow. But David held on, wrapping his arms around the foal's chest from behind, using his body to shield the animal from the current's full force. "Easy, easy, I've got you," David gasped, his own body beginning to shake from the cold. "We're getting out of here together, okay? But you have to trust me." The foal was remarkably small, probably weighing around 200 pounds, still heavy, especially waterlogged and struggling, but manageable. David began the agonizing process of swimming them both toward shore, knowing that he was burning through his remaining strength and body heat with every second. The river seemed determined not to release its prey. Twice the current grabbed them and pulled them back toward the middle of the channel. Twice David fought their way back toward the calmer water near the bank. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed in protest. His body temperature was dropping into dangerous territory. But David's training, determination, and sheer stubborn refusal to let this animal die drove him forward. Inch by agonizing inch, stroke by exhausting stroke, he dragged himself and the foal toward the riverbank. His feet finally touched the rocky bottom, and he stumbled forward, still clutching the foal, falling to his knees in the shallow water near shore. David collapsed on the muddy riverbank. The foal sprawled beside him, both of them trembling violently from cold and exhaustion. For several long moments, David could only lie there, gasping for breath, his body shaking so hard his teeth chattered uncontrollably. But ranger training overrode physical distress. He had to check the foal, had to make sure it was alive, had to begin warming them both before hypothermia claimed what the river hadn't. He forced himself to sit up and turned his attention to the young horse. It was breathing, shallow, rapid breaths, but breathing. Its eyes were open but glazed with shock and cold. David ran his hands over the foal's body, checking for injuries from the ordeal. Miraculously, aside from some scrapes and what would certainly be massive bruising, the foal seemed physically intact. But as David's hands moved through the soaked coat, something felt wrong. The texture was different than he expected. He looked closer, pushing the wet fur aside to see the skin beneath, and his breath caught in his throat. Stripes. Faint but unmistakable stripes ran down the foal's legs, and along its back, barely visible beneath the dark, waterlogged coat, was a stripe pattern that made David's heart race. He looked at the foal's head more carefully. The shape of the muzzle, the ear placement, the overall proportions. "No way," David whispered, his scientific mind warring with what his eyes were telling him. "This isn't possible." With trembling hands, he pulled out his waterproof smartphone and began taking photographs, documenting what he was seeing. The stripe patterns on the legs, primitive markings called zebra stripes that occasionally appeared on certain horse breeds, the dorsal stripe running along the spine, the ear tips with their distinctive tufts, the overall body structure that was subtly but definitely different from a typical Mustang foal. David had a degree in wildlife biology. He'd studied extinct and rare species as part of his training, and what he was looking at wasn't a Mustang at all, or at least not entirely. The markings, the body structure, the primitive characteristics all pointed to something that shouldn't exist in Colorado, something that hadn't existed in the wild in North America for over a century. This foal showed characteristics of a Przewalski's horse, the only true wild horse species that had never been domesticated. Native to Mongolia and China, Przewalski's horses had been declared extinct in the wild in the 1960s and only survived through captive breeding programs in zoos. They'd been successfully reintroduced to their native habitat in Asia starting in the 1990s, but they had never, ever been part of North America's ecosystem. Except David's mind raced through possibilities. There had been rumors, unconfirmed stories among the ranger community about a private exotic animal collector who'd operated illegally in the region decades ago. Stories about escaped animals, about breeding programs that were shut down, about animals released into the wild when authorities closed in. What if those stories were true? What if a population of Przewalski's horses, or hybrids with Przewalski's genetics, had survived in these remote mountains for decades, undetected, interbreeding with wild Mustangs, creating a unique genetic lineage that nobody knew existed? David looked at the shivering foal with new eyes. This wasn't just a rescue. This was potentially one of the most significant wildlife discoveries in North American history. And this tiny, cold, terrified creature might be living proof of a hidden wild population that had been surviving in secrecy for generations. David's first priority was still survival, both his and the foal's. Despite the monumental significance of his discovery, hypothermia was still the immediate threat. He activated his emergency beacon, requesting immediate medical assistance and wildlife transport, then focused on warming them both. He stripped off his wet outer clothing and wrapped the foal in the emergency thermal blankets he carried in his pack. The young horse was docile now, too exhausted and cold to resist. David rubbed its legs vigorously, trying to restore circulation, talking to it constantly, keeping it conscious and engaged. "You're something special, aren't you?" David murmured, his scientific excitement breaking through even his physical discomfort. "You're going to rewrite textbooks, little one. You're going to change everything we think we know." The helicopter arrived within 30 minutes, a testament to the efficiency of Colorado's emergency response system. Paramedics immediately began treating David for hypothermia, while wildlife rescue specialists carefully loaded the foal into a specially designed transport crate with warming elements. As David was being evaluated, he grabbed the arm of Dr. Lisa Chen, the wildlife veterinarian who'd arrived with the rescue team. "Lisa, you need to see this. Look at the leg markings. Look at the dorsal stripe. This isn't a typical Mustang." Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she examined the foal more closely. "David, are you suggesting—" "No, that's impossible. Przewalski's horses don't exist in North America outside of zoos." "Look at the evidence," David insisted, his teeth still chattering. "The primitive markings, the body structure, the ear tufts. Either this is the most unusual Mustang mutation ever documented, or there's a hidden population out here that nobody knows about." The implications were staggering. If David was right, it meant that for decades, possibly generations, a genetically significant population of horses with rare wild bloodlines had been surviving in these mountains, completely undetected. It raised questions about biodiversity, about the resilience of wildlife, about what else might be out there in the wilderness that humans hadn't discovered yet. The foal was transported to the Colorado State University Veterinary Teaching Hospital, where a team of experts would provide medical care and, crucially, conduct genetic testing. David, after being cleared medically and warming up sufficiently, insisted on accompanying the foal. This was his discovery, and he needed to see it through. Over the next week, as the foal recovered from its ordeal in a specialized equine intensive care unit, genetic samples were analyzed by some of the leading equine geneticists in the country. David barely slept, constantly checking his phone for updates, pacing the halls of the veterinary hospital. When the results finally came in, the conference room at CSU was packed with wildlife biologists, geneticists, conservation experts, and Forest Service officials. Dr. Raymond Park, the lead geneticist, pulled up the analysis on the large screen, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Park began, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and excitement, "what we have here is unprecedented. This foal carries genetic markers from Przewalski's horse. Approximately 23% of its genome shows Przewalski's characteristics. The remaining genetics are from Mustang populations, but this is not a recent cross. The genetic patterns suggest this hybridization occurred multiple generations ago, possibly 5 to 7 generations back." The room erupted in excited conversation. David felt vindicated but also awed. This little foal represented a secret history, a hidden legacy surviving in the wild Colorado mountains. The discovery of the hybrid foal launched the largest wildlife survey operation in Colorado's recent history. If one foal with Przewalski's genetics existed, there had to be more. There had to be a breeding population out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness of the San Juan Mountains. David, now recovered from his hypothermic ordeal and hailed as the hero who made an unprecedented discovery, led the survey team. Using drone technology, camera traps, genetic sampling from scat and hair, and old-fashioned tracking skills, the team began piecing together the mystery. It took 6 weeks, but they finally found them. Hidden in a remote, almost inaccessible canyon system that most maps didn't even show accurately, was a small band of wild horses, approximately 30 individuals. And among them, the signs were unmistakable. The primitive markings, the unique body structures, the genetic legacy of Przewalski's horses living on in this isolated population. The story that emerged from historical research was fascinating. In the 1970s, A wealthy private collector had indeed illegally imported Przewalski's horses as part of a personal breeding program on a remote Colorado ranch. When authorities discovered the operation in 1982, several horses had already escaped or been released into the wilderness. Most people assumed they'd died out or been absorbed into existing Mustang populations without leaving a significant genetic trace. But this small band had survived, thriving in isolation, their unique genetics persisting through generations. They represented an unintentional but remarkable conservation success story, a population maintaining rare wild horse genetics outside of any official program. The foal David had rescued, now officially named Rio after the river that almost claimed him, became an ambassador for this newly discovered population. The question now facing conservationists was complex. What should be done with this unique herd? Some argued they should be captured and placed in managed breeding programs to preserve their unique genetics. Others insisted they should be left wild, monitored, but not interfered with, representing a naturally occurring hybrid population adapted to Colorado's ecosystem. The debate raged in scientific journals, conservation circles, and government meetings. David had his own opinion. He'd visited Rio dozens of times as the young horse recovered and grew stronger. He'd seen the wildness in those eyes, the spirit that had kept Rio fighting in that raging river. And he knew, deep in his heart, what the right answer was. 3 months after his rescue, Rio was deemed healthy and strong enough for release. David was given the honor of opening the transport trailer door. They'd chosen a release site near where the hidden herd ranged, giving Rio the best chance of reuniting with his family, assuming they were still looking for him. As the trailer door swung open, Rio stepped out cautiously, testing this new freedom. He looked at David for a long moment, a look that seemed to carry recognition, gratitude, understanding. Then the young horse turned and galloped toward the distant tree line, toward the mountains, toward his herd and his heritage. David watched until Rio disappeared from sight, a smile on his face and unexpected tears in his eyes. "Run free, buddy," he whispered. "You've earned it." The hidden herd of San Juan Mountains continues to roam wild today, monitored by researchers but left to live as nature intended. They stand as a testament to nature's resilience, to the surprises that still await discovery in wild places, and to the courage of one ranger who risked everything to pull a drowning foal from a raging river, and in doing so discovered a secret that had been hiding in plain sight for generations. And somewhere in those mountains, a young horse with ancient genetics in his blood runs with his herd, carrying within him both the legacy of the wild and the memory of the human who refused to let him die. Rio and the San Juan hybrid herd are now protected under a special conservation designation, monitored but allowed to remain wild. David Martinez received the Department of the Interior's Valor Award for his life-saving actions. If this incredible story of rescue and discovery amazed you, please subscribe to our channel for more true stories of wildlife heroes and the surprising secrets still hidden in our wilderness. Smash that like button, share this video with animal lovers everywhere, and drop a comment telling us what surprised you most about this story. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we're brave enough to dive into the unknown, even when the waters are dangerous and the outcome uncertain.